Hey witches, how you doing today? We're back with another video and I'm kind of excited for this one. We're going to talk about incorporating your senses into your witchcraft and why you'd want to do that and how you do that, and we'll start with sort of an overview of the human senses. There are actually about 22. But now before we get started, for those of you who are new around here, my name is Taya. Welcome to the channel where we talk about all things witchcraft. And for those of you who are returning viewers, maybe coming in from another video, welcome back. I appreciate the support. All of you, please consider subscribing. It's a really great way to help us build the channel. Okay, let's talk about senses. So everybody sort of knows our basic 5 senses, right? Touch, sight, hearing, smell, and taste. So let's just review those really quick so we're all on the same page. So touch is really through your skin, and it has to do with pressure, temperature, vibration, pain, and all of those actually have different receptors on your skin, right? Even texture, right? Texture is a combination of those different senses, but texture is something that we can feel. And then we have sight, which comes from our eyes, right? And the rods and the cones in our eyes, and where we sense color, details, motion. We also have central and peripheral vision to consider. We have hearing from our ears, which has to do with actual vibrations, right? Vibrations of sound waves. And it also ties into our senses of balance and equilibrium. We have smell from our nose, which is actually one of our most primal senses. And humans can actually smell, did you know this? Over 1 trillion different scents. I didn't know that. That's pretty crazy. Our sense of smell is actually just as good as a dog's. I always thought that was like the myth, right? That dogs have like this super sense of smell that we don't. Actually, humans can detect just as many smells as dogs can. Interesting. Taste, right? Through our mouth. We have our 4 tastes of salty, sweet, sour, and bitter, which all have different receptors over the tongue. And we also have receptors for umami or savory. So there's actually kind of 5 different tastes. And interestingly, did you know that spicy is not a taste? Spicy is a pain. It's actually from our pain receptors. And taste also works in conjunction with smell and texture or touch. So when we decide if we like the taste of something or not, it has to do with its like salty, sweet, sour, bitter, but it also has to combine with the smell and the texture. So that's why like some people, when they get COVID and they lose their sense of smell, they also lose their sense of taste. There's one lady I follow on TikTok and she got COVID and she was doing all these tests and she said it's really weird. She's like, I can taste that this is sweet. She goes, but I couldn't tell you what it is. She goes, I can only tell you it was a melon. And she's like, I couldn't tell you what kind of melon it is. I can only tell you that it's sweet. But she doesn't have her sense of smell, so she can't actually figure out the full taste of it. So those are our basic 5 senses, but we also have up to, well, it depends who you talk to. Some people say 33, some people say 21 or 22, but around 22 senses. So things like proprioception, which is our sense of movement, our spatial orientation, so where our limbs are in space. We have balance, we have temperature, stretch. We have stretch receptors, so like in our muscles to know like when your muscle is sort of at its tearing point, or like in your bladder to know when you have to pee, right? Those are stretch receptors. Temperature, right? Hot, cold, all that. So those are all different things that can play into different senses that we have. There are some ways that your senses can kind of go, I'll say wonky a little bit. So you can have a thing called synesthesia, and basically that's where your senses get crossed or kind of conjoined in a way. So some people see sounds as color. Certain sights can elicit certain smells for some people. And there was one that was going around on TikTok for a while, and it was tell me your name and I'll tell you what you taste like. And it was like people's names, so hearing words and experiencing a taste that goes with that. And another really interesting one that goes around quite often is about being a tetrachromat. So it has to do with your sense of sight, and typically the majority of people are trichromats, which means we have 3 types of rods in our eyes. And that lets us see between 20 and 32 colors in an average color test. That ranges 0 to 39. We can see about 20 to 32 of those colors, or differentiate 20 to 32 of those colors. Now, dichromats are people who can see less than 20 colors, and they have 2 different rod types. And tetrachromats are people who have 4 rod types and can see 33 to 39 colors. So they can actually see more colors than the average person. 25% of people are tetrachromats and 25% of people are dichromats, leaving 50% of people who are trichromats. So that's kind of interesting, right? Senses aren't necessarily the same for every single person. They can be very different in different people. So anyways, assuming we have the typical 5 senses, how do we incorporate them into our witchcraft? And more importantly, why would we do that? So let's start with the why. Why incorporate as many senses as possible? To me, it's about creating an immersive experience, about stimulating as many senses as possible to really draw us into the work. Our senses are how we perceive our reality. So in essence, we're attempting to create as real an experience as possible. So if you're going from, say, simple spell casting through to a full-blown ritual, we want to create an immersive experience to solidify it into reality. Think of it as like shoring up our intentions, right? We have an intention to do something or to accomplish something, right? Like I want to fly out, or I want to create a spell to, I don't know, hex somebody, right? We want to create as that intention, we want to make it a reality. We want it to feel as real as possible. So how do we do that? How do we incorporate our full range of senses? Well, there's 2 different ways. One is incorporating your senses, right, which we'll talk about. And the other one is actually removing sensory. So sensory deprivation can also work to your advantage in your witchcraft. So let's talk a little bit about how that works. We'll start with touch. So if you're doing something like spellcraft, feel each ingredient. Like put the ingredient in your hand and actually feel its texture. Feel its crunchiness or its slipperiness or whatever while you're addressing its spirit, the spirit of that ally, that ingredient ally, to draw in its correspondences. One that I like to do when I'm working with my ancestors, and I meant to bring it and I forgot, it's outside, is I have a resin skull that I work with. And I'll hold it in my hands, I'll like cradle it in my hands by the back of the head, by the back of the skull, and it will warm to my touch, and I get the most crazy, like, I don't know what you would call it, like image blasts almost, as I'm holding this skull, almost like ancestral memories that come forth. And it feels like I'm actually holding somebody, like I'm cradling somebody's head in my hands. If you're working with a spirit animal, have a little bit of their fur or their antler or one of their skulls, whatever, a physical representation that you not just look at, but that you hold in your hands and you feel, and you can, you know, incorporate that touch into what you're doing. And if you're not comfortable working with actual like skulls or, you know, physical remains, you can get awesome replicas done in resin. So you don't actually have to purchase like a, you know, an actual animal part. You can get resin replicas that work just as well. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about flying out. So for me, when I fly out, I have a big soaker tub in my basement. I fill that baby up to the top with hot water and I float in it. That floating creates that weightlessness, that idea of flying really pulls into nicely. And it's also a little bit of sensory deprivation, right? I'm not having any sort of physical touch on my body except for maybe my neck where I'm anchored to the back of the tub and the rest of me is floating. The other thing I find with flying out is I need to be warm. My temperature needs to be up. So I need to be in a hot bath or under like an electric blanket cranked to high. And I have the best experiences. It's almost like my body needs to feel safe and cradled and, you know, warm. And then I have these amazing flying out experiences. So that's touch. Sight. So a really basic one is have images to look at of like the spirit or the deity that you might be working with. The way I like to do it is I have spirit candles. So I'll use this one as an example. So I have like spirit candles where I've actually, like you can see it's just taped on with clear packing tape, and I actually tape these to the front of my candles. So I have something to visually look at to represent that deity. I'm great at visualization, but it takes one more thing off my visualization plate so that my visualization can really go towards my intent. And when I'm thinking of this deity, I just have to look at this candle, and when it's lit, it like glows from inside and almost looks alive. The other things with sight I find are kind of more deprivation, but having low lighting, right? Working by candlelight, that creates that atmosphere, that witchy atmosphere. I do a lot of my work during the day. And so what I do is I go down to my basement, and I have 2 rooms. I have my furnace room and a bathroom in the basement that don't have windows. And I go in there and I close the door, and all of a sudden it's pitch black, and then I can light some candles and work by candlelight that way. I mean, is it ideal? I'd rather work at my altar, but sometimes I need that low light experience. The other way that I play with sight is I work with a hood or a cowl or even like a veil, and you have it come forward so it blocks out your peripheral vision, because even when you're focusing on the work in front of you, your brain is still pulling in all of this sensory information from your peripheral vision. If you bring it in, it makes it so much easier to just focus on what's in front of you. And it gives you a real keen focus of the work at hand. And I find it really intensifies the experience. The way of hearing. So a really simple one, right? Have some background music. It sets an ambiance, and it also blocks out background noises, right? Of maybe your dog barking or the furnace kicking in, or just those little things that can kind of knock you back. When you're working with spell ingredients, crunch them between your fingers, right? Or if they're kind of sticky, listen to the sound of that. I find it ties sort of into this idea of mindfulness. I find sound is very grounding for me. We take a lot of noise for granted, and our brain filters it out as background noise. So you know when you pick something up and you set it down, it's going to make a sound. Typically, your brain doesn't really register that sound. It hears it, but it just goes, not important, right? It's not important. Listen to those sounds as you're picking things up and you're putting them back down. If you're pouring some water, listen to the sound of the water pouring, the clink of the cup as you set it down, the crunching of ingredients between your fingers. Another really interesting exercise you can do around hearing is to do your work in earplugs or noise-canceling headphones. And what happens is all you can hear is sort of the sound of your own body. It blocks out every other noise. And I find that can be really interesting. I have a pair of, not my noise-canceling headphones, but I have a pair of earplugs that just block out all the sound really well. I can hear myself blink. It's a really different experience if you're listening and your voice sounds different and you can hear yourself blinking. You can hear, you can hear like as your body is, as I move my head, I can hear the crinkle of my old joints in my neck. It's really interesting to try doing it with that like sensory deprivation to your ears. The next one is taste. So first of all, only do this if you know it is safe. But you can taste your spell ingredients. Now, not all spell ingredients are safe. So do your work first, do your research first. But say you're working with a little bit of lavender. You could taste that lavender before you add it into your spell. And the other thing around that would be things like, often we're drinking a beverage as we're working, and it's easy to just be like, oh, I'm going to drink some tea. But look at make it appropriate to the activity that you're doing or the spirit or deity that you're working with. That also goes down to working with a hoozle or having cakes and ale in a ritual, right? Make it seasonal. So in the summer, you want to be eating fruits and things of that early harvest. In the dark of winter, you want to be eating like those dense breads and things that people would eat to sort of sustain them over the winter. Make it appropriate for the culture or the time period that you work with. I work with Scottish folklore from the early modern period. So my ritual breads are bannocks, they're oat cakes, they're things that people would have eaten then. Make it appropriate to the deity or the spirit that you're working with. So if you're working with Germanic spirits or deities, right, maybe you want to drink beer. If you're working with like a Greco-Roman pantheon, maybe it's wine. I worked with one deity spirit who was associated with milk and honey, so I drank honeyed milk. Anytime they have honey and something else, add honey to it, it makes everything taste better. Right? But that's taste. And then finally, my favorite is smell. So smell is the most basic primal instinct. Smell goes straight to your inner brain, to your amygdala, and it passes right through your outer cortex, right? Your cerebral cortex. It doesn't go to your cerebral cortex. It goes straight into your inner primal brain. And so it doesn't go through that thinking, interpreting, like all our other senses are interpreted by our higher brain, and then it sends a message to our primal brain about what to do about it. Smell goes directly into your primal brain. So of course, obviously, incense or scented candles to work with. They create an atmosphere. If you're doing, say we'll talk like meditation, right? And you're in a garden, have some floral scents. If you're going to be in a forest, have pine resiny smells. If you're working, right, you want to just create that sacred space. Maybe you're going to burn copal or myrrh or frankincense or some combination of them. Something I like to do is use essential oils and put them in a diffuser. You can smell the ingredients of that before you're putting them into your spell jars. When I make spirit houses, so either like a spirit jar or a spirit box, that kind of an idea, I always add smell. I put essential oils in it. And then when I open that container to work with that spirit, I get a whiff of that smell, and it instantly, over time, it will instantly remind me, yes, that's that spirit, the essence of that spirit. And finally, with smell, I like to do an anointing oil. So before I start any work, I put on this one very specific anointing oil, and it literally reminds my brain, oh, we're going into witch mode. We're going into that space. And because I always use the same one, right, over time, my brain learns that that smell is associated with that feeling of witchiness. So I love smell. Smell is a really important one to work with because of that primal brain connection. So yeah, there are many different ways that we can work with and incorporate our 5 senses, our basic senses, into our witchcraft, and I'm sure our extended senses as well. Maybe I missed something. Let me know in the comments, or is this something that you play with? Do you play with this idea of, you know, incorporating all 5 senses and creating this really immersive reality for yourself? I'd love to know. Leave us a comment. Otherwise, that is our video for today. Thank you so much for hanging out. We'll catch you in the next one. Mwah! Thanks so much, you guys.